The Bitcoin price is currently falling, and we're taking a close look at why. Michael Saylor also says exactly when Bitcoin is going to explode upward. The event that everyone is now waiting for is Bitcoin breaking out upward. Additionally, Michael Saylor is making a great special announcement with strategy, which is currently the subject of very, very heated discussion. Some say it's brilliant that Michael Saylor is now buying even more Bitcoin, but there are also more and more voices that are very critical of this, and we have to look at that as well. We have the FOMC meeting coming up tomorrow, so there's exactly 24 hours left until the next very important event that a lot of investors are watching closely to see what will happen there. We'll take a look at that too. And Trump plus Putin are meeting today for a peace talk or peace phone call. And if there is positive news here, then that could also mean that things are very, very positive for the market. And be sure to stay until the end, because then I'll show you my new Valhalla bomb from the cliff jump in El Salvador. But first of all, we have a lot of volatility, and we are now taking a close look at why. Because the FOMC meeting is happening tomorrow. That means tomorrow it will be decided whether interest rates in the US will go up or down. We already know that nothing major is going to happen there. The central bank will very likely neither lower nor raise interest rates. So we will stay at the same interest rate level. However, we need to understand that a lot of people are feeling uncertain right now because they're not sure what Jerome Powell is going to say. We don't really know what the game plan is right now, and a lot of people, at least that's my take, are currently in a risk-off mode. That means they're pulling out capital because there's uncertainty. That's why Bitcoin is falling, because they're just waiting for tomorrow to see what's going to happen here, how Jerome Powell assesses the whole situation. He's going to give a short speech, and then he'll announce, okay, what's it looking like? What's the next step? So tomorrow, while there won't be any changes to interest rates, he will definitely give us a glimpse of the new plan, maybe drop some hints about whether there will be cuts or hikes coming up or whatever else might happen. And that's always the moment when there's uncertainty in the market. People start selling everything off, and then when that certainty comes back, the capital flows back into the market. We're seeing that it's not just Bitcoin, but also in the traditional financial market. Here, the Nasdaq 100 is extending its decline today by over 315 points as geopolitical tensions rise and concerns about a trade war increase. That's the next topic. So we still have all these worries about a trade war, and that's why Kobeisai unfortunately says that the S&P 500 is being sold off. And as a result, Bitcoin is also taking a hit. The market is currently back in risk-off mode, but Michael Saylor also has a few very exciting takes on it later. And then we have the long-awaited call with Donald Trump and Putin. Putin has even promised that he intends to sell some of his securities here, which are currently confiscated by the USA. It's not Putin who's selling, but the US is selling it, and it seems like Putin has allowed it. And that's already a small concession perhaps, where it might be clear that, okay, maybe Putin will make concessions here. If there were a peace deal here, if a ceasefire were discussed and debated here, then that would potentially be bullish, not just for Bitcoin, but for the entire financial markets. We need to see how that turns out. There are different time references. Some say it will happen in an hour, some say it will happen later, and so on. I don't know exactly when the call will take place, but we'll find out what happened here. And if anything comes up or something like that, I'll keep you posted. But it's definitely possible that if something really strange comes out, like Donald Trump having another outburst or something like that, it could create some volatility in the market. And now we have to look at the very controversial announcement here from Michael Saylor, before we then look at his statement here about exactly when Bitcoin will break out upwards again. And this is really crazy. So we officially have the news from Michael Saylor. Strategy announced today the launch of Strive, a new offering of perpetual preferred shares that will be available to institutional and select non-institutional investors. I'm going to show you this cool view while I explain what it's all about. So MicroStrategy, or Strategy, wants to issue approximately 5 million of the new preferred shares in order to raise about $500 million for additional Bitcoin purchases. And the new Strive preferred shares are supposed to pay a 10% dividend. And unlike the preferred stock strike, which was the old strike, now we have Strive, and it won't be exchangeable for common stocks. There are also some small differences in the dividend. The dividend is now a bit higher, and it's variable. It can even go up to 17%, or was it 16%? Something like that. That means we have small differences in dividends and so on. But all those details aren't really that important for you to know. What is much more important here is that if we look at the comments section by Michael Saylor, of course, right at the top, Peter Schiff gives his 2 cents, criticizes it, but that is not so relevant because the critics are always more important than the other comments that you can see here. Here, someone writes Ponzi. And then on the other side, someone says, the train will never stop, meaning Michael Saylor is going to keep pushing forward. But now people are also saying, this is getting out of hand. Michael Saylor is really losing control over this. It's starting to look Ponzi-like, and there are a ton of other comments that are criticizing this pretty heavily as well. So you really have to understand that, yes, Michael Saylor, he's really hitting the bullshit here and so on, and he just has to play through the game now. He's kicked this thing off, and he can't just say, okay, I'm done with Bitcoin purchases. Because the investors, the shareholders, and so on, are demanding that he keeps going with the leverage strategy and all that. But more and more people, because the Bitcoin price is now low, are realizing that this could all be a Ponzi scheme, and we've had that several times, including in the last bear market. And then people criticize people saying, oh, MicroStrategy, what are they doing, and so on. That means that criticism always comes up when the price goes down. Then people panic. We now have a massive concentration of risk here, and yes, there is a certain risk. The risk that MicroStrategy could blow up isn't zero, but the liquidation prices are still very, very low. So Michael Saylor had calculated something back. Sure, by now he's probably made a lot more Bitcoin purchases, so the liquidation price is likely higher now. But Michael Saylor could also throw in some collateral or whatever. So there are different opinions on this. I don't think it's completely problematic in any way. Bitcoin would probably have to correct by another 50%, and then we could debate whether it's really slowing things down. But feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments about how you see all of this. And now let's take a look at the latest statement from Michael Saylor from his new interview, which is really making waves and is very, very relevant. And here he also specifies exactly when the Bitcoin price will start to escalate again.
This is kind of a historic entry point because all of the risk has been stripped off the asset. Like, you pretty much know Wall Street's going to embrace it, the U.S. government's going to embrace it, and banks in the U.S. going to embrace it, which means that all the other banks will embrace it. You already know all those things, and yet the market is really skittish based upon concerns about tariffs, the disposition of the U.S. economy, the interest rate forward graph. And so you see the interest rates have pulled in 30, 40, 50 basis points, and we're in this macro risk off zone. When that flips, I think Bitcoin will rip forward with a vengeance.
He brought up some really interesting points here that I've also mentioned in previous videos where I told you, hey, we're currently in a risk-off mode. And as long as nothing changes in this risk-off mode and we don't shift back to a risk-on mode, we can't expect any big jumps, no matter if massive announcements come out or if even crazier news drops and so on. Because people keep commenting, yeah, every day there are these huge news stories, but nothing happens with the Bitcoin price. Well, that's because we're still in that risk-off sentiment. And that's exactly what Michael Saylor wants to explain here. He is saying that there has never been a better time to enter the market than now, because we have the security, we have the confirmation here from Wall Street, from the USA, from the banks. That means Wall Street is betting on Bitcoin. Banks are betting on Bitcoin. He says here they embrace it. Here the US has a strategic Bitcoin reserve. We know the US isn't going to ban it. They're going to regulate it. Smartly, just like Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, says, the US is going to continue to open up to Bitcoin. Donald Trump says they want to become the crypto capital of the world. Scott Bessent says they want to become the digital asset hub of the world. That means we have all the Bitcoin bullish statements, and yet people are scared now, and these are the points that Michael Saylor mentions, that there are still the trade wars, the tariffs, which simply always lead to uncertainty. Sure, we still have the Ukraine situation, which might settle down, and we could get some news from Putin and Donald Trump later on. Michael Saylor didn't address that, but he then goes on to talk about the economy, which is still uncertain, and inflation is also not entirely certain how things will develop. Then we have the interest rate story, which is what I said before. As long as we don't know exactly what will happen with interest rates and when interest rates will go down, when interest rate cuts will come, and so on. So investors are pulling their risk capital out. And only when Jerome Powell says, okay, hey, we're turning the money printers back on, will that risk capital start flowing back into the market, especially when we know how things are going to play out with the tariffs. I said this before, April. That could be a crucial date because that's when the reciprocal tariffs go into effect, or some speculate that Donald Trump is just bluffing and there might be a de-escalation of the trade war. We don't know. That could still be an important date in May. Then there's the next Fed meeting, which could also be a key date. Or it could be that tomorrow Jerome Powell hints, hey, we're getting ready to turn the money printers back on, which would definitely be a very good sign. He simply states that the macro risk-off zone is currently active, and as long as we have this macro risk-off zone, it will be very, very difficult for Bitcoin to break out. But now we have more exciting statements, and the moment when Bitcoin will break out is exactly at that switch, when we go from the macro risk-off zone to the macro risk-on zone. So, when we switch from a risk-off sentiment to a risk-on sentiment. And now let's take a look at more statements from Michael Saylor, which are also very bullish and super interesting.
You said Wall Street's going to embrace it, and that is true, but still it's limited. I've been talking to these RIAs here. Many of them are very interested in Bitcoin, but a lot of them have questions when I walk around and say, what do you want to hear from Michael Saylor? They say, well, we're still concerned about suitability issues. We still have issues about recommending them to our clients. This is still a real concern. What do you say to those who are still concerned about suitability?
The only asset endorsed by a president of the United States in 50 years is Bitcoin. I mean, go back in the last 200 years in the history of the country. And I think if you go to the founding fathers, they wrote in the Constitution that money is silver and gold coin. And then at some point there was a chicken in every pot, and maybe with the founding of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, we endorsed everybody to single family home ownership. But in the 21st century, you have just one asset, Bitcoin. The president saying, don't sell your Bitcoin. Saying more than that, saying the United States won't sell its Bitcoin. And so everything else you put your client into, if the US government seized any other security that you sold to a client, if they seized any collectible, any art, any real estate, they would sell it. The only thing that the US government won't sell if they are to seize it is Bitcoin.
So that was really interesting, where he simply says, hey, Donald Trump is the first president to endorse an asset and say, hey, we're all in on this asset, which has never happened before. Sure, he then points out that in the Constitution of America, it's stated that gold and silver are money. That's also what Ron Powell always brings up. It actually doesn't work that the central banks settle with fiat money in between. That's actually not allowed constitutionally. You can only settle money between central banks in the US with gold or silver, but they don't even do that anymore. So they don't even pay attention to the Constitution anymore. And that's why he also says to end the Fed. That's always Ron Paul's statement. Michael Saylor says something similar, mentioning that Donald Trump is the first president in a really long time, going all the way back to the Constitution, who is legitimizing an asset again and saying, hey, we're backing this asset. And that's a big deal. That's also where people say, okay, I'm still unsure. Is this going to work? But Michael Saylor is very clear about it. He says no. Wall Street, BlackRock, the US, Donald Trump, all these folks are betting on Bitcoin, and anyone who freaks out now is just going to regret it later. They'll end up having to buy Bitcoin for 5 million or 1 million if they finally come around in 10 years or so. Let me know if you see it as a historical opportunity too. I definitely see it as a historical opportunity. We're about to check out my new cliff dive, but before we get to that, I'm going to drop a link below to 21 Bitcoin, where you can easily buy Bitcoin and take advantage of this historic opportunity to be among the frontrunners. The whole thing is super easy, simple, and as mentioned, with the Bitcoin Hotel code, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. And now we're going to check out the hyper-bullish Bitcoin cliff jump here in El Salvador. You guys have to give me your ratings again. Drop them in the comments.